course, my early memories go back to the mid-realm.
Yeah.
I was in grad school in Indiana. And one of the ladies on my floor had a poster on her door saying "Forward into the Past." And actually it wasn't a poster, it was a newspaper article. And there were all these people, evidently on a university campus, dressed in medieval clothes, dancing. And there was sort of an implicit invitation to ask her what that was about. And so she told me, and the other woman, this was Eleanor of the Tall Trees. And Eleanor of the Tall Trees and myself and another lady, Winkle of the Corner, became roommates the following year. But we more or less were recruited to the SCA when we met her in Res. And our first joint event was the three of us going down to Riven Star, which was a lovely, lovely event. It was a crown tourney, and Duke Sir Finbar was fighting in it. And that was actually the crown tourney that, well, it was the crown where Michael of Worshaven had just become king. I don't remember who won the tourney. Anyway, there we were on at the fairgrounds, and we looked across, and there were three people from the science fiction club. So three of us and three of them. And so we started a shire. And our nearest group was Riven Star, which was really lucky because they were a hugely growing shire. Moonwolf had just become Baron. They were Barony, and we looked up to them tremendously. He was going out with Tsarina, who was the queen. And I know there's some stories in the history of Ealdormere like that, or close to like that, but Michael had been fighting, and it became apparent he was going to win, at which point they needed to find him someone to fight for. And Tsarina, who was a Tarkina in the Horde, was proposed to him, and that's how they happened to reign together. My second event was a Christmas event up in Traegertsea. And that was fantastic because it was a 12th night, and Eleanor's parents were there because they were both in the society as well. And there were little children, and there was people of every age. And they were mostly doing Viking. And I don't remember if that was where I met Thorbjorn the Greysides. He was somebody that I looked up to tremendously. He was one of the first masters in the society, and he did Viking very seriously. The other person who did Viking very seriously was a guy named Hakon Redbeard. I met him my first event. He had an outfit that had been made for him in Iceland, not just cut, but spun, dyed with natural dyes, and put together. And you have no idea how unusual it was at that time, because I can tell you that one of my first outfits was made out of Kiana. It kind of looked like silk, you know. So I got a really lovely introduction. My next encounter with the society after that year in Bloomington, Indiana, that's the Shire of Minnesota in the Middle Kingdom, was I was overseas, and I was getting my Kingdom newsletter, and some lady named Lady Asivia Bassan Verview had started a group in Ottawa. So when I got back, I got in touch with her. And she had come here from Norlande, which was a shire that had been, she'd started out of York University. And she started here. She managed to find us a seneschal, Thomas of Linlithgow, no relation. And there was me, and there was a bunch of SF people that she had recruited to bulk out the application to be recognized as an incipient shire. And only one of those people really hung around, and that was Pierre de Léchard. And he's actually a member of my household and a member of her household. We didn't meet until 81 or 82.
Yeah.
Sylvia had persuaded me to go to an SF event. And Henry had been quite active in the SF community, right?
79.
79. That's right. And I don't remember the AS. My first year in the society was AS 10. And after that, it gets a bit hazy.
You always look them up. Yeah, I mean, I got involved with the SCA about 1970. Well, about 1976, I got involved with Toronto science fiction fandom, and fairly soon, actually, met Steve Mulberger and Gillian Watts.
Jill Klotz.
Yeah. Yeah, and I knew they were in the SCA. Sort of, I think about the time I started university, it was very convenient because Afriwick meetings were at the International Student Center. The International Student Center was right amongst the engineering buildings. So it was like, so it was certainly a place I knew well. So I started showing up at the meetings, I think, because I knew some of the people already. Met Torben of Amber Hall. Ilted, probably very early on.
Jahan.
Yeah, Shahan was definitely quite active in those days.
Because our first event in Skraeling, which just slightly predates us knowing each other, we had 6 out-of-towners, all from Everwick. Gillian, Torben, Finvar, Ragni, Jahan, and who am I missing? Anyway, 6 people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great because the Baroness had come to visit us, you know. So those were all really people that I looked up to. In fact, I was very much in awe of absolutely everybody. Wound up having a really nice conversation with Finvar at a wonderful event at University of Toronto. It was called The Castle of Perseverance. It was a medieval play, and it had been put on right by students.
The PLS, the
Poculum Ludique Societas.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
They did a number of big summer events in successive years. They did mystery plays.
This was a really seminal event, actually, because there were Morris dancers, which means probably Torben was dancing, and probably also, who do I mean, but still Morris dances?
Tamara still dances, but I don't think any of the SCA people were in the Morris, were doing Morris.
Len Heidebrack.
Oh, he's a number of years after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, there were Morris dancers. But the other thing that happened was the second day when I went to set up my little blanket selling hand woven belts, finger woven belts, was somebody was using my shade, but she had a canopy. And I said, would you mind terribly moving so I've got some shade? This was Searu.
Oh.
And, you know, my, 2 of my closest conspirators in Skraeling Althing were Joran and Elfleda. And Joran had met Searu, and she had told each of us that we would love each other and she'd have to get us together. And we met by accident. And we have been fast friends ever since that day.
I think at that point, Searu was living in Ithaca.
Yes.
But she'd like been from Toronto before. And
I should tell you about the arms. And I should tell you about the arms we didn't get, which I think was a good thing. First of all, I owe so much to Sylvia. She founded the group here. I don't know when I would have got round to it. I was dying to come home to a group, and there it was. As I said, she got a bunch of people together so she could do the application. She also, she gave the group its name. She also came up with some heraldry, because you sort of had to apply with what your tentative arms of the group would be. And I think it was done in a hurry because it was basically very Canadian. It had a silver fleur-de-lis, a gold maple leaf, an Iroquois coupe stick proper.
Which makes me think that Enid must have already been involved.
He wasn't, no, he came along,
okay.
He came along later.
Despite the Iroquois coupe.
So we really liked the name because obviously it was nice to make a pun on Ottawa, but we didn't like the arms. And one weekend, Joran then went off to library school in London, and that was before there was a group there. And she would come back and visit me, and we would get into a particular beverage that we both liked. And during one weekend, we decided that we needed to make the arms be a hare. Now, why a hare? Well, because Thomas of Linlithgow had told us the story of Little Bunny Frou Frou. Exactly. And we got more mileage out of that than is in any way reasonable. But when we came to do the arms, we thought, a coney is not that dignified. Hares are more, you know, valiant and everything. So she drew it. And the reason the hare is salient to the sinister is because she couldn't draw it salient to the dexter. So that's gone through a lot of iterations, because I think that subsequent barons decided that salient was a bit wimpy, right? So these days it's almost combatant, I think, our hair.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell her about how you officially came to Skraeling Althing.
Yes. So I graduated from university. One of the things to put some context on this, there weren't a whole lot of SCA people or events in Ontario in the period we're talking about.
No?
Yeah, the Barony of Septentria always struggled to keep its mandatory numbers. You know, now like the Baronies have hundreds of members, but this was that.
Yeah.
So it's actually here.
That's right.
After I moved to Ottawa, and in fact after Jennifer and I started a relationship, and one of the things that was intermittently a thing was the People's Autonomous Collective of Efferwick,
Pace.
as it was then, Pace. So for some reason, we sort of concocted a story that I was fleeing from Efferwick because I had been falsely accused of being a participant in Pace, and came to Enid for sanctuary.
I don't think I've been Baroness, well, maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, so of course he gets, I mean, the other person who, you know, has to take a lot of blame for the SCA in Ontario is Finbar. And you know, he mentored Everwick, and he was a good friend to us. So Henry put Finbar up to coming up in court, and Finbar strides up in court and denounces Henry as a, you know, fugitive. And I was not in on that. I mean, I think you tipped me that you were going to do something, but I didn't know what. So it was up to me to then say, you know, I couldn't possibly, much as I respected the Duke, that I could not possibly yield somebody who had called for sanctuary. But quite frankly, you know, it was also a way to get very, very close to me.
Which hair was that?
or 5. This is 1982.
Yeah, so that would have been about hare 4, I think, because the first feast I cooked was hare 10, which would have been in the late 80s.
That makes some sense, because like a seminal year for me was 81, where we did the play. You sometimes still hear people talk about the play.
Yes.
I'm trying to think now who would have been in. Mordain was not in it because he was away. But Elfleda was. Pardon?
Bill and Brenda were.
Yeah. Yusuf and Ivy.
Yeah.
In fact, they played the visiting barons in the play. Who else? Sivia? Yes, Sivia. Oh, Damien. Svetan.
Yes.
Yes. It was Svetan's idea. And it's a really good thing that we didn't kill each other. He was the producer and I was the director. And it was very ambitious of him, because he got the Alumni Theater for us. And we wound up between us, I don't know, we recruited between friends, relations, and some total strangers. I actually recruited a waitress in the Mayflower to come. We had somewhere between 60 and 70 people. And the English, there was an English class who was doing, what the heck were they doing? They were doing a play. It was a body play. It was hilarious. So we did a play. And I remember that the lady of the house was carrying on with somebody else, and she sent her husband off to mend a basket with a melted candle. And she would periodically tell him to chafe the wax. And to this day, if you say chafe the wax to Ivy, you're going to break her up, because it was just about what you think. Henry's blushing, by the way. Oh, Dernhart. Dernhart was in that.
Which means that Thora was already.
Yes, Thora.
Yeah.
Thora, who's Lady Mistress Anne Grey. Thora was in it, and Thorgrimmer, and Galen, and Catagen.
Mm-hmm.
Galen was wonderful. One of the things that happened was Father Arbeau visited Castle Althing and gave a dance lesson to Catagen and Thora. And although I had written most of the lines of the play, I thought, this one is beyond me. And it turned out that Galen had, I think, some acting experience, and he wrote the whole script of the dance lesson. That was all his. And he saved our cookies a couple of times, because he also played, we did a Robin Hood play, and he did the Sheriff of Nottingham. The Sheriff of Nottingham was the only one that was coherent. Robin Hood had about 3 lines, and that was Yusuf, and he forgot all of them. The only thing he could remember was that was in the play, by all means. In the play, it was by all means, and that, but he did the same thing when he was Robin Hood. He had 1 line, but so the sheriff looked really, really smart. We did a lot of plays. In the early days, they were kind of rough and ready. That was the story I wanted to tell you about. Ragney used to do wonderful events in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was the Round event. She called it Round. It was at the Enoch Turner Schoolhouse.
Which was round.
And the tables were round. That Duke Caradoc visited. And I think I heard he was going to be there, because he was kind of famous. I heard about him from Eleanor from day one, because he was a Traeger Sea person. And I heard he was going to be there. So we're driving up to this, probably off Slade and Mordain, and driving up looking for parking. We get parked, and it's really good. We're not less than a block away, and we get out in our garb. And what do we see but the immediate aftermath of not a fender bender, but a fender kisser? And there's one really bemused lady standing by her car, and in front of her is the shortest guy you've ever seen, dressed in white and black Arabic robes, a white turban with a long feather. and he is salamming and apologizing. I don't even think they exchanged license numbers. I think she was too rattled. And I heard her say, "I'm okay." And I heard this very American voice say, "I'm okay." And it's like it's from the very short, nevertheless very imposing personage. I thought, okay, that's correct. That night, the Skraeling Fools did a very silly play called One Day in the Roman Arena. I'm sure when any of them remember this, they will be blushing too, but we did it. And I remember we borrowed somebody from Norlandy, and I don't remember his SCA name. He was a very large guy named Drags. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
he was the governor that did
Yeah.
the thumbs up or thumbs down. Anyway, we did this thing and people laughed. And Caradoc bounces over and says, "I've heard of you people." Because he knew Thomas of Linlithgow.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I don't remember what Bob White. He was Robert A.G. White, which is why he was known as Rag. He sort of kept company with a lady by the name of Doreen Long, who was Lady Anne of something or other.
Who did very late Tudor. You know, the kind where the cheeks are white and the waist of the dress is hugely elongated and it comes out like that. Wow, that was one of her big things. And it was brave because everybody was doing Dark Ages practically, except for, people like Gillian who did High Gothic.
Mm-hmm.
In Toronto, there was a pretty hefty overlap between the science fiction community and the SCA groups. Not 100%, but especially I think Norlandy was, which was very nominally based out of York University by that point. It had more of the SCAF of the SF people.
SF and the Tolkien Society.
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember Lilidril was from
Jeanette Walden.
Was from the Tolkien Society, approximately.
Yeah, she was also from Norlandy.
Your stories have sparked a memory that I had completely forgotten about, of going very, very early on for me to an event in Efferwick, and we got lost on the way out, trying to get back to the highway, as one does. And it was like midnight. We're driving around downtown Toronto. It was Attain and Phaedrig and a couple of other people from Trinavantia Nova. And we drove along a street, and there was somebody I recognized from the SCA sitting outside having a drink on a front step.
What a relief.
So he gave us directions and we got on the highway, but it turned out he was visiting. I was telling this story at Penzic the following year, and he came up behind me and said, "Yes, that was me. I was staying at Iden and Katha's house."
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the streets to drive past, that was the one we happened to hit.
What are the odds? Well,
Yes.
They're fairly early. There was actually a group in Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah, I think that's where he was from.
Well, I'll bet you dollars to donuts it was Robert Levesque, because Robert was a traveling fool, and it was a very small group there, and he came to every event I can think of. He came to ours without fail.
Big, tall guy?
Yep.
Yep.
Tall and just, I think, I wish, in retrospect, I wish that he had been recognized for the amount of time and love that he put in. A lot of us did in those early days. We traveled hugely because the trick, well, especially in the early days here, was we needed to get people to Everwick so they could see how an established group worked. And once we got them to Everwick, we had to get them down to at least Windsor so they could see how they could see the king, right? They could see really what the society looked like when it was on show. So those were those two things.
If you look at an old order of precedence, you see this fascinating bump. Almost all the awards were delivered in March, because
Clancy Day.
Clancy Day and Starleaf Gate was typically the one of the few occasions on which mid-realm royalty were likely to actually set foot into what would eventually be Ealdormere. Was then actually was Septentria. Starleaf Gate was part of Septentria, even though later they decided not to play with Ealdormere.
Now, the business of like AOAs was something else too, because until Talamar came here, we had never been visited by royalty. We've had several since then. I mean, and it was lovely every time. But they didn't come here, and they didn't usually come to Everwick. So you had to go down and fetch these things. And we all used to go to Clancy Day. One year it was like 3 cars of people in about 2 rooms. One year, it was like they were going to give Thomas of Linlithgow's AOA, for goodness sakes, our seneschal, you know, and made arrangements to go down. I don't know if I'm conflating 2 events, but the one I'm remembering is, I'm conflating 2 events. That was a long one, but there was another time when we went down and the passengers in the car were Theodoric. Oh yeah, that's right. He changed his name. Thierry de Lechard. And Joran. And I didn't know this, but there was a snowstorm. And not only was a snowstorm, but they were closing the road behind us. And we passed 18 vehicles off the road, including tow trucks and, car transports. But down we went. Joran's contribution was she went into the back seat and fell asleep for most of the trip. And Pierre or Theodoric spent the time in the front seat talking to me, so I just didn't lose it and get off the road. But we used to joke that if you said Clancy Day, it would snow.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All you had to do to make it snow.
And I remember that when I moved to Skraeling Althing, that was part of the joke.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And not so many people went down to Clancy Day even by then, although it was still pretty popular, but the joke about the snow was still there.
I believe that Clancy Day later moved around the calendar. I think there was one in May, which probably didn't have snow. I wonder how many people are still in the SCA who ever met the doc. We did. Or Ragney.
Morgenstock.
Yeah.
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 The dog was Clancy. He was
yes.
Irish setter, yeah.
I think.
Well, a lot of big things happened at Clancy Day. We were created a barony at Clancy Day. Mm-hmm. That was an interesting thing, because it was an enormous slog to get the paperwork done, because of course this is before you've got an internet where you can shove stuff up the pipe, and several people worked very hard on it, Anne and I in particular. And I decided that not only would I mail as you're supposed to do, I think the mailing was supposed to go to the seneschal and send 3 copies to there. And I thought, I think I'm just going to send a copy to the prince. I know that the only reason that those documents got to the meeting that passed us as a barony was because Mumel took them. And he knew us.
Yeah.
And there was all of 10 or 11 of us there. Because a lot of, you were saying about not that many people went to Clancy Day later on, and that's true. And a lot of people didn't think it was going to happen that fast.
Well, what year did that happen?
82.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I moved up here in 85. And it was already a barony.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I have a complete set of chronicles that was from the very, the first issue through until sometime in the 2000s.
Cool.
Good.
That was a real labor of love.
Yeah.
The first chronicles came out on a Gestetner, but then we did it for a while at Carleton, and eventually I think we just started pirating Xeroxes. And
Well, once I was here, I remember doing, about 1984, when the Macintosh came out, we had access to some Macs at DNR. Certainly, at least cover pages there, or contents pages, plus stuff done on the Xerox 9700.
I was going to say, there's an awful lot of early chronicles with that beautiful Times typeface that Times like that the Xerox 9700 did.
Yeah.
Hey, Glenda, were you the person that took over the Chronicle
Yes.
when I finally gave it up?
Yes.
That's what I thought. And you did it for a few years.
I did it for quite a while, and then I stopped, I think, when I moved at one point, and then I picked it up. And then the second time when I went to El Salvador, I kept producing it from El Salvador and just shipped all the files. And I think it was Anne would then print them out and distribute them for me.
That's wild.
Yeah, that's how much it had changed.
Yeah. This is actually a science fiction fandom story. At one point, there was a lady in someplace in South America, I think Argentina. She was an active fanzine fan, but she had so little access to stuff, she used to boil her own gelatin and make hectographs. Hectograph is a precursor to the ditto process. You write in mirror image in special ink in a pan of gelatin, and then you moisten it with alcohol and slap a sheet of paper on, and you could get like 30 copies if you're lucky.
Yeah, I thought I was sacrificing myself when on the Gestetners I would do the illustrations with a skewering pin. So they were line drawings that I would etch into the Gestetners skewering pin, but
Yeah,
nothing
it's
like
crazy.
yeah, because the word has to get out.
Well, and the Chronicle was such a labor of love. There were so many research pieces that went into that, and original art and original poetry and stories.
Yeah.
It was, I think I always loved the Chronicle far more than any of the official newsletters or anything, because they were just so much more interesting.
Because that was an SCA thing too, right? There was a time where even when we were first doing it, that newsletters had to bear the thing that said they were unofficial. And at first they almost tried to forbid them at first. That's the society, and they couldn't. So you had to absolutely swear up and down that it was unofficial. And then of course came a time where they were mandatory.
Yeah.
It's lovely. And of course, when we would do the April Fool's issue, it would come up with a disclaimer: this is definitely not the Skraeling Althing Chronicle.
Yes.
I mean, talk about research. There was the April Fool's issue where we produced in 50 languages, Hair Today, Goon Tomorrow, including, and I actually found the piece of writing today when I was going through files that Nain's mother wrote for us.
Oh, cool.
with it in Mohawk.
Oh, cool.
Nain took me, we went to Montreal together, and he took me to meet his mother, and I spent overnight at their house. And I asked her, I said, could you possibly give me the Mohawk for Hair Today, Goon Tomorrow? And she says, oh, that old thing.
So that reminds me of another, the Save the Unicorn Fund t-shirts. Who was responsible for that? Is it STUF? sometimes known as these stuffed shirts or stuffed shirts.
Oh my goodness. I think that was yarn. I think that was her art.
Yeah.
I think that was her art. And they were navy shirts with a white unicorn. I'd completely forgotten.
It came with like an explanation, and it was from a non-existent organization. Help us restore and repopulate unusual magical fauna. Harumph.
And I think Alfreda would tell you that there
it
were
sounds
people
like
that tried
Thomas
to donate.
Saw a sense of humor got into the wording.
I'm not even sure they were an item when she came up with that.
Oh, could be.
Maybe.
I remember wearing a Save the Unicorn Fund shirt at some Worldcon in the US, possibly Boston in '84.
I know there've been people who've tried to donate when they saw the shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Yarn and Alfreda used to come up with stuff, okay?
Oh, and then there's the Meanings.
This wasn't SCA.
This is a little earlier. Well,
no, it wasn't.
Well, okay, yes, it wasn't in the SCA, but the people were. One of my first trips to Ottawa, MapleCon 2, which was definitely when I met Jennifer. Actually, I think it was MapleCon 3 you did the Meanings.
Yes, I think so. Well, I don't know. I remember you were one of the only people that got up and danced with us.
Yeah, I have pictures from it. So it's more like
that was Sylvia's fault.
Mm-hmm.
She got us into a lot of stuff. You know, there are certain names that just keep coming up again and again and again.
So you cooked the first Feast of the Hare, I think. Yeah.
The first feast we had was not a Feast of the Hare. Oh geez. Thomas of Linlithgow booked us a community center, and when we got there, they didn't think he'd booked it. And we had to be out of the room by about 7 o'clock. And it was Alfreda and I who cooked the feast. We were the only ones with and people said, well, you cooked before. Oh yeah, right. I was salad and dessert cook at the last minute Sarin event before I left for overseas. And I'm afraid my salad was Greek salad. And it was just lucky nobody made any comments about it, because I did not know at that time that tomatoes were out of period, at least for me. So yeah, we cooked that, and we even had a subtlety, which we presented to Jillian. That was where the 6 Everwick people had come. And that was our first event. And our second event was a February event. So actually Feast of the Hare was the following year. And we're going to have to blame Sylvia again, because they had a wonderful event called Feast of the Bear. And some of their Feasts of the Bear were just so great. The Henry and Eleanor event, one of the best events I've ever been to. And I thought, what do we call it? Well, obviously we'll call it Feast of the Hare, right? Mm-hmm. And I can remember, I don't know if it was that first one, and it might have been because it was at Hintonburg Community Center, and I'm roasting 6 rabbits. And Caitlin comes out to the kitchen and goes, Enid, they look so helpless.
Well, I still remember that the guideline was that in Skraeling Althing, we don't eat hare or rabbit except at Feast of the Hare, and then we must do so very reverently.
That's the one. That's the one. Now, the tale started at a Christmas party at Statans, where Thomas was going to be going home in the next semester, because he'd finished his degree. He was American. He was from Windmaster's Hill in Atlantia, and Joran was going off to school. And they came up with the idea together, and she sewed, I don't know how many tales. And then she left, whereupon she gifted the fur to me. So actually the first tales that I gave out, I was the MOA, I wasn't the Baroness. And one of the reasons we did it was we had been a group long enough that we felt critical of some groups being rather premature about recommending for awards. But you sort of looked and it was like, you want to do something. When people have done really nice things in the group and they're starting to find their feet, what do you do? And so that was how that tale evolved from being a farewell tale to being a congrats, you're one of us.
What changes did you notice over your time as Baroness, and what did you enjoy the most? And then you've not talked about when Henry became Baron, which I remember, but was much later than when you became Baroness.
I'm trying to remember how there was basically kind of like a petition to, because like we'd been married quite a while by that point, and
it was definitely Ariake.
Yeah, I got a court barony first, from Fern.
That was an amazing event. I'm not sure if that wasn't down in someplace like Trinovandia Nova. It was someplace far, and we'd been doing a lot of traveling, and it was not so long after I gotten my peerages, and I said, Henry, we have to go to this event, and I didn't tell him why. And so we went, and it was pretty good because it had to get somebody to pry the camera out of his hands because he had.
No, that was my pelican.
That was your pelican?
Yeah.
Oh.
Because I was sure they were about to give it to Daffy.
Oh. Okay.
Who was standing behind me.
Okay. Oh. Then he got his court barony when I got a dragon's heart. That was from Fern.
Okay.
Because we embarrassed the heck out of her because both of us kissed her hand.
Yeah, so at some point, I think it was largely because like the group had grown enough that, in the sense that it could accommodate two people not holding offices, because I always been one of the people who was herald or whatever. I was never seneschal. I've probably done. And I was never seneschal. I was never treasurer. I probably held most of the others at some point.
We were a bigger group by the time you consented, but I remember Ariake, because you kept saying it ain't broke, why you don't fix it, and I think she persuaded you that.
Yeah.
So
you may well be right.
Ariake and Tadashi.
Yeah, it would have been around that time.
And Ealdormere is already a principality by then, because I can remember like the wool sack and our setup for. I can remember. Well, they were very instrumental in sort of some of the early Ealdormere ceremonies and things like that. And I can remember. I can remember some adventures in that.
I really wish parliamentary seating had caught on, because it actually works really well. But.
Oh, it's beautiful. There was that court, and you and he were on the wool sack, and we were in the round, and
that was the first Ealdormere coronet, which I think I characterize as 2 hours of tourney, 3 hours of feast, and 4 hours of court.
Yeah,
I think I must have been at that too. I don't particularly remember it. But then I was usually hanging out at the back of court with Szilard and Mordrith.
Yeah. Szilard is somebody I met at probably my first, actually Szilard is somebody I became in contact with before I joined the SCA. Because he'd done some art for a Star Trek fanzine a friend of mine put out.
Is he the person that I'm forgetting came to our first event? He may well be person number 6, because he's one of the earliest people, and he was always a supporter for us.
Yeah.
I still remember we went down to a murder melee to let the crown know that we were going to step down. And because that was the time when it was switching over, right, to, and it was also probably long past time for me, not so much for Henry, but for me, I needed to. And her then Majesty was there. And I can remember going over and sitting under a tree with Szilard and a couple of other people, and him saying something like, "You're still always going to be Enid to us." And that was a beautiful thing to do. I've remembered that, you know?
Yeah.
It's good that the society switched to terms for barons. And if you think I was hard to get rid of, ask somebody to tell you about Baron Thorvald in Northwoods. He stayed Baron for years after he never showed up.
Yes.
They never summoned the energy to get rid of him. It was like a joke.
Actually, I think they kind of liked it in some senses. You know, it was, you know, the very distant eminence grise or something.
Something I really liked was the way we handed it over. Well, I liked that whole process because, you know, you poll the populace and the crown decides, right? And that was you and I and Mencken supervised that election when we had candidates from every canton. And I know some people are absolutely convinced it would never leave Ottawa. And of course it did. It went to Christina and Eric, who did a good job. And I liked doing that ceremony because we did it earlier in the day. We adopted them, as Romans do. You know, that was good. Oh, and another thing that touched me immensely, they didn't tell us who's going to do this. He wore the arms of the barony with the cadency mark during the day, and then of course took them off after he was elevated. I really liked that. That was nice.
Yeah. I'm trying to think who else I really remember from the early days. There was Rickard.
Yeah.
I loved Rickard coming to ANS events and coming up with the most deliberately horrible entries to poke holes in the silly rules around ANS entries that were there at the time.
Not just Rickard.
Well, there were kind of two complicated games that we used to play with, because the other one was somebody would come up with something fairly lame, and we would see how high a score we could give it.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, somebody found a scrap of aluminum, miscalibrated it in centimeters, and you know, drew a little tricycle on it, and we found we could assign it 8 or 9 points. One of the found entries was, I think,
Candle.
Well, no, that was more or less serious.
Okay.
But I think Sierra entered the breadcrumbs.
The breadcrumb eraser.
Yes, because we and somebody, you know, some wood chips, and, you know.
Oh, the measuring thing under the bridge.
All the things you could do with wood chips.
Rickard, the other thing Rickard did though was enter entries that were extremely authentic.
Yeah.
You see, we didn't like the mid-realm criteria because some of them stank, and the one, you know, I particularly remember for alcoholic beverages, it was not good. So Rickard deliberately made a beautiful leather bottle to put his beverage in, because the mid-realm criteria said you had to give marks for the glass bottle and how well it was filled and that kind of thing.
So that technically got a 0 for bottle.
You know, and they gave him a 6 on judge's impression because.
That always reminds me of Tarver the Pole, a very tall gentleman. In those days, the judging was anything but anonymous, and in fact, you know, typically the judge, especially I think in brewing and venting, the judges all tended to have entries. You know, you didn't assign a score to your own thing. But Tarver had made some dandelion wine, and there was a universal response from Rickard and Iden and me, and I don't remember who else was judging, which was we spat it out and rinsed our mouths because it tasted of something nasty and chemical.
The suggestion was that the dandelions had been picked at Queen's Park.
Well, it had probably been sprayed with something. Being a time when people were still allowed to spray dandelions. That was Rickard, Frederick LeVar, and I think,
Yes.
all got our pelicans on the same night. And then they promptly had a pelican meeting for us to attend. I was down in Rising Waters.
I remember the, you know, the pelican meeting where the royalty decided that they were going to make Henry a pelican. They'd had a poll, and that was Emerus and Emmeline, and they were staying in our house. And at some point over the weekend, he said, "Enid, we're having a pelican meeting." And said, "Is there any good reason why Henry shouldn't be made a pelican?" And I can't think of one, you know. Because that was still back in the days where there weren't, you know, we weren't Ealdormere yet.
Yeah.
So there wasn't very many people to speak. I don't know what would have happened to us if there hadn't, you know, been people who loved us and sponsored us, and some of them were from the near mid-realm. We had people that just really fostered us. Yeah. The whole of what's now Ealdormere.
It's always been interesting to me that the relationships with the East Kingdom for this part of the barony never developed in the way they might have. And I know there are great friendships back and forth, and there's travel back and forth, but Ealdormere, or even down to Northern Outpost, so they're actually way closer than our nearest canton in some ways. Well, and yet we don't do as much as we could.
Yeah, we did have a good friendship in our days with Ealdormere. And because I remember fondly Henry and I going down and teaching dance. And to be more accurate, Henry taught dance and I translated.
Yeah.
And we had a lovely time. And they would come up here. There was a guy named Jacques who was their seneschal, and he was a lovely man. And he had a friend whose name I don't remember, and I should remember it. And his friend flew hawks. And they came to the event that we stepped down. And this guy, he put a Jess in my hand. Yeah. So, and we went down a few times to Mountain Freehold when Baroness Murray was there. And she and Sivia were good friends.
Yeah.
So we did have that relationship once upon a time. Oh gosh, I remember going down to an East Kingdom coronation in Chambly.
Oh yeah.
It was running against some event in Ealdormere, but Henry and I went, and it snowed. That's the closest, though. Fort Chambly is the event that probably looked the most like some of the events you see, you know, over in
places like Raglan or something.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Although, you know, like the University College Quad on a good day could, you know, very, very.
That's true.
Middle Ages.
Were you at Reynard and Brynhilder's coronation there?
I don't think so.
I think it was Palomar and Catherine's coronation.
Oh, Reynard and Brynhilder were stepping down.
But that was the one with that wonderful yellow and black Byzantine garb they had.
Oh, my soul. Covered in
Where-
amethyst.
Where was that?
The quad.
U of T, University College Quad.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. I did a couple of events there, but I was so new that it was all a bit of a blur.
Yeah. Well, Catherine had tried to make it so that when they were crowned, it would be like, I don't know, noon.
And the bells would be ringing, but the court ran a little late. So, in fact, the bells rang for Graydon's AOA. Graydon was a big
Player.
Yeah, big part of it, early Grey Fells.
Yes, he was.
He had an event at his farm. Tons of us went for that one.
I'm trying to remember whether I was at that one. I have a feeling I was.
You know what I most vividly remember, other than it was nice, and we gave them a bit of a hand because there was not a lot of Grey Fells people to do it, was dusk fell and the mosquitoes came out. And I had just finished doing court and I was suddenly just like smacking myself all over. And Rajid said, I remember him going, Enid, wait, temperature's going to fall and they're going to go away. And about 15 minutes later, they were gone. And that still seemed like the most magic thing. I don't even know why I believed him, except he was, because there are mosquitoes here. What do you mean they're going to go away? But he was very earnest about that.
We were just up Barry's Bay a couple weeks ago, and
Yeah.
we were reminiscing about a demo we did. Well, actually, two demos we did. The first was quite odd. It was actually for some insurance or investment company, but they had a knight on their logo, and we wind up, which is a ski hill. The ski hill is still there. It's currently seems to be closed, but and it's changed hands and names 3 or 4 times in between. But we had kind of, Jen had a key for the chalet so that we could use the washrooms, and it was the roughest of rough camping. Yeah. It was nothing other than there was a washroom.
And somehow we were totally fine with that.
And Ivan and Mefanu were there.
Yeah.
They overshot.
Because they didn't listen. They didn't listen.
Didn't listen to the directions. They wound up in Combermere. Bloom was there. Bloom and Kasha.
And Flaughlin and Caravella.
Huh?
And Adelhart and
Eglantine?
Yeah.
and Bleodane, who was a friend of Caravella's. Cassia, you already said them.
Yeah.
Oh, and Derhart was there. No, what I remember about the demo in Wilno was Barney standing beside me saying, and tell them their taxes are due. Yeah, first he said, tell them that all this land belongs to you, which I think, Wilno did actually fall within the bounds of the barony at that point. And it said, and their taxes are due. So I stood there on the porch saying all this stuff into the microphone. And, when we danced for them, and I think there was a fighting demo, and then I remember the next day, all of us, or maybe late that afternoon, all of us just walking into Lake Temiskaming to cool off, including Nain, who was waiting for a hernia operation and wasn't supposed to do anything of the sort, but he waited up to, his waist just to cool off.
I shouldn't keep you anymore. This has been really, really great. Just remembering all of these people and thinking about all of these events.
As long as you promised to say that if everybody wasn't remembered, I just got edited out. There's so many people to be thankful for,
Yeah. Well, I can remember when I first moved up, a lot of the people that you were talking about, Joran and Thomas and some of those had already gone. But I can still remember a Black Tower party at, can't remember
Really?
whether it was your place or
Oh, yeah.
Alfleda's.
It was my
And
place.
yeah, and I think one of them was still there, had not yet moved away or had come back for a visit or something. And that was the only time I ever met her. Might have been your. It was those Black Towers parties, they went on for quite a few years after that. And then they would disappear for a while, and then they every once in a while there would be one that would pop up again. That was a very silly tradition. That was a lot of fun.
I remember there was probably a couple after we were married, at least one at our place.
Yeah.
Spent the early part of the evening, at least, with a bunch of the guys over at Ealdormere.
We had the first baronial court in May because Anne, who was seneschal, was going over to Britain. So we had done our first Roman event, which was kind of Italian Roman. We had chariot races and things like that. And we invited speeches, and he got up and did one in front of Reynard, who of course all day we called Caesar, about the Republic must be restored. He actually got up in front of mid-realm royalty and preached about how the Republic must be restored, and he was really good.
He was a lawyer, mundanely.
And I mean, mundanely, Job Strumhauer is a professor of what, history or poli-sci or something.
Yeah.
So I think they probably enjoyed it even more than we did.
Yeah.
I remember sitting there and my hair was falling out, oh my God, somebody's doing this to Caesar. I can't. In persona, that's very embarrassing. Thank you for asking us.
No, well, thank you so much. I don't know if you recall, but this year's taxes is actually stories.
Ah.
Oh. So
So,
you're getting a little bit of a jump on the taxes.
or you are.
I don't know whose fault that was. They decided at some point there should be taxes. I never set any taxes. It was the barony who decided the taxes should be. And they got way more elaborate after our time.
Yeah. I don't really recall them being a thing until Mencken and Kess.
Oh no, they were an annual thing for, well, obviously before that, because yeah.
Yeah, but they were the first ones that I really remember as being something that I had to pay attention to. But I do know that this year they want to tell stories. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much.
It's okay for you.